Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
Thank you, Gene. He asked me what to say this morning about me, and I told him anything but the truth. But we know each other, as Gene said, and it's really no problem. This thing has been tremendous up till now. And I don't know what you say after it's all been said. So I'll say the same thing because you haven't heard me. And I want to hear me. So I'm going to say what I think is necessary for me to say. Introductions, I've had problems with chairmen everywhere I've ever been. Usually the chairman that is assigned to introduce me don't show up. My sponsor says people are trying to tell me something. I was in Oklahoma several years ago, and now what I'm going to say here has absolutely no connection or similarity with my chairman. If it does, it's simply by coincidence or whatever you might call it. But this Indian told me that people from the Indian Affairs in Washington were down to reservation, and they went to see the chief. And they said, "Chief, we're going to do a lot of things for you people." Says, "We're going to build a university right across the expressway here for your people." To which the chief replied, "Hoya." And then he said, "We're going to build an Olympic-sized swimming pool right down by the side of the university for your people." And the chief replied, "Hoya." So he said, "We're going to build an elementary school for your people." The chief said, "Hoya." He made several other promises to which the Indians were very familiar with promises from the white man. And to the same, he gave the same reply, "Hoya." So the men turned on their heels and started to leave, and about the time they reached the door, the spokesman for the crowd turned around and said, "By the way, Chief, we understand you have some prize Angus bulls. Would you mind if we went out in the pasture and inspected these bulls?" The chief says, "Okay, but don't step in the Hoya." But here's one thing I can say about this introduction that Gene gave me. It's the most recent one I've had. I'm an alcoholic, and my name is Franklin Williams. By the grace of God, to fellowship with men and women like you, and because this program does work, it hadn't been necessary for me to take a drink today. And for this, I am most grateful. I don't live in Texas, but I've been in Texas quite a bit, and it's the custom in Texas to give you sobriety date. And the only reason I'm going to give mine is because I'm bragging. My sobriety date is October the 15th, 1956. That's 23 years and a little less than a month. Now, I say the only reason I'm giving it is to brag. And I'll attribute this length of sobriety to one thing only. I haven't had a drink of alcohol during this time. Now, that's real simple. And the reason I say it is because it took me so long to catch on that drinking had something to do with me getting drunk. And I don't think we stress enough with new people that they're not supposed to drink. And I think there's another thing I don't think there's a lot of people in AA that figure, a lot of new people that figure that you got to stop drinking. So my sponsor stressed with me that you wasn't supposed to drink. And he said the thing that got me drunk was drinking. He said alcohol never caused anybody into trouble till you drank some of it. And that was a profound statement, and it took me a good while to catch on to this. I'm what the big book refers to as a real alcoholic. And there is a difference. I think this old gal from Akron, I think if she'd have had one more drink, she'd have become a real alcoholic. She was about to get a problem. I was worried when she was talking there. I figured if she didn't hurry up and quit, she was going to have a hell of a problem. But she caught on to that not drinking. And that's a good deal. I'm an arrested alcoholic. In fact, I've been arrested many times. I don't know how many times I've been arrested. I wish I'd kept up with it. But I didn't know it was going to be a thing of social prestige when I got to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Who knows? AA, with all these grants and these federal monies and all, AA may come up with a pension plan. And me not knowing how many times I was in jail, I might lose out on some benefits. So it's really important. I am a member in good standing of the Quonset group in Memphis, Tennessee. That's where I came into AA. I also attend on a regular basis the group that my roommate mentioned Friday night, the Olive Branch group. I was taught that you're only a member of one group, and you're only counted at one group. You can go to as many groups as you want to. Now, this is what they told me, and this is what I believe. So since I came in the Quonset group, I don't want to transfer my membership, but I still want to be a part of the Olive Branch group. And we attend it every Thursday that we are not out holding services. But when we're in town, and I'm a regular in my attendance to the Quonset group. Now, in both of these groups, excuse me, we are studying the Big Book. And we are learning what the directions are and finding out how to follow these directions. And that's always been hard for me to do, is to follow directions. We are having new people to come in both of these groups, and they don't hear all of this outside jazz. All they hear is what comes from a book called Alcoholics Anonymous. The steps in the program have been referred to here many times this weekend, and I'm glad. Because Gene said up here that the guts of this thing is these 12 steps, and that's what I was taught, and that's what I like to talk about. So they bring the big books to the meetings. And one of the new fellows that I'm sponsoring, he had his first birthday here about 3 weeks ago. I got him to go to the state convention. I told him to bring a recorder and sit down over there by me, and we'd plug him in. So did, and he got there with his recorder and his big book. And he said, Franklin, I don't see anybody here with a big book. Now, see, he didn't know that you could go to a meeting without a big book. And there's nothing wrong with that. So I'm real proud of both of my groups. So the text of my sermon this morning is going to be to keep it simple and follow directions. And that was my problem and is my problem. This old gal that almost had a problem said, learn to read the black, what's in black in there. And I had a hard time doing that because I had to interpret and read what I thought should have been between those lines for a long time. So we are only studying in these big books what is down there in black. And we're getting terrific results. And the thing is, I'm getting terrific results from doing this. In order to keep this thing simple, I have to bring in my sponsor. And I don't think enough is talked about sponsorship today. I'm glad to see, well, I don't see Bonnie, but I talked a good deal while we were here, since I've been here with Bonnie. And I'm of the opinion, and I'll give you the right to be wrong, but I'm of the opinion that AA is not the same now as it was when I came in. It's always really a pleasure for me to see fellows like Gene and like Bob, who've been around a long time, who are still coming back. Now, I hear a lot of people say they owe everything they have to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you never see them at a meeting unless you ask them to speak. Well, if they wait for me to ask them to speak, I'll never ask them to speak. But if they don't have enough gratitude to come back at the other meetings, well, they're not members of AA as far as I'm concerned. Now, I'm stepping out of my line to have that opinion, but I got a right to it, and I'm not going to change it. So, I'll have to bring in my little sponsor. And my original sponsor, or the one that had me for so long, has gone on to the big meeting, and I can call his name now, David Gates. I don't think there are any of you in the room except Eloise that knew little David. And he was quite a character and quite a member of AA. Profundity never got me sober. Never any profound thing that anybody said to me really had any meaning. It was some little simple something. And I think I think that I've got to talk, or David had to talk to me at the level of my understanding. And he did. He used profanity. He called me SBs and names like that. And I could understand that. And that's the way he got my attention. So I'm going to have to bring in what David told me and how David got my attention. Now, I've talked about this several times, and people ask me, where do you find sponsors like that? Well, unfortunately, we don't have enough of them. There's still a few scattered around. But my purpose in talking like this is that hopefully and prayerfully that I will become the type of sponsor that my little sponsor David was to me. And hopefully and prayerfully that you will become motivated to become that type of sponsor. Since all of these monies came in, we're getting members of AA in our area and the places I've been faster than we can string them. And we're losing a lot of them. And I think we are at fault. I am at fault. And I think the reason for this is lack of sponsorship. Now, I didn't have sense enough to select a sponsor when I came in. Had I would have selected someone who was still drinking. Because that's what I did for the first 9 months that I was in here. And I didn't associate with the winners. I associated with the people who were still drinking because I was trying to find a way to drink and not get into trouble. And I think the book says something about this being a mental obsession. And I didn't get rid of that mental obsession for quite some time. So the group appointed 3 sponsors for me. They sublet me. And I fired all of them, but I couldn't fire little old David Gates. And David said, I'm not enjoying this any more than you are. But I'm going to take you on a trial basis. And says, if you don't do the things that I tell you to do, well, I'm going to get rid of you. Well, I didn't do the things that he told me to do, but I still couldn't get rid of it. I kept hearing people say there's no must in the program. And David told me, he said there are 74 musts in the program. And I'll just tell you a few of them that are really not in the program, but they are must for you. Says if you want to stay sober, you must become willing to do anything, even if it means stop drinking. And he said that's not in the book, but that's a must for you. And said we have found that alcohol never causes anybody any trouble unless they swallow some of it. And says you must not swallow any of it. And said rarely have we seen a person stay sober who continues to drink. Said you must not drink. Said there are 74 other musts in the book. And he kept preaching about read the big book. He had a pat answer. I could ask him what time it was, and he'd say, don't drink, go to meeting and read the big book. So I learned anything that I said to him, I had to tell him that I had already read the big book. And he kept preaching about reading that big book. And I said, David, you know I'm unemployed. I'm unemployable. I don't have any money. I'm eating out of club room. I'm staying in a garage apartment that's gratis of friends. There's no way I can get a book. Now, somebody else mentioned this. I've been saying it for 20 years, and you ain't heard me say it, and I like the way I tell it, so I'm going to tell it again. He said, before you get too darn honest, you go out and steal you a big book. And said, by the time you get on to that step, we got a step in this program whereby you can make amends for stealing that book. Said the program tells me to go to any lengths, and that might mean for you to go out and get a book at any lengths. And I said, David, yeah, you people, I said, you can stay sober. I said, all of you got wives, you got nice threads, you got nice wheels. I don't have any of these things. If I had these things, I too could stay sober. He knew where everything was in the big book, but he couldn't read. I read to him for 5 years out of the big book before I found out he could read. He said, turn to page 98. And I turned to page 98, and he pointed down to the bottom of the page, said, read that. Said, read out loud where I can hear it. So I read it out loud, well, as long as the middle of the page. He said, the book says, wife or no wife, our sobriety does not depend on others. And then a few lines down, but in our willingness to trust God and clean house. He said, now look on page 99. And he pointed there and said, read that. I read it, and then I flipped the page, and he said, on page 100, read that. I read it. He said, what does it say? I said, it says the same thing. He said, I know it. He said, Bill figured some cat like you is going to come along, and you'd miss it on page 98. And you might miss it on 99. But you're sure to get it by the time you got to page 100. So I said, David, I'm an agnostic. This is all right for you people that believe in God. Well, I didn't know what an agnostic was, but it sounded like a good excuse for me to drink. And he said, that don't make a damn. He said, all you got to do is make up your mind whether you want to be a sober agnostic or a drunk agnostic. He said, now what next? I said, David, I ain't got no faith. He said, I know you ain't. I said, you're not going to have any faith until you apply these steps to your life, and then some things are going to happen, and you're going to know where they came from, and then you will have some faith. I said, yeah, David, but you always talk about God's will. I don't know what God's will is. He said, I know you don't, but said, you know what it ain't. And said, you just do what it ain't. And I said, David, suppose I wasn't an agnostic and I wanted to find God. How could I find God? He looked at me, and he always had a little, he'd twitch his lip up and wink that eye, and a little smirky grin. And he looked at me and he said, you SB, God ain't lost. But then I'll tell you this, the first 9 steps of this program will surrender anyone that takes them. And said, I'll say that without reservation. And then he had me to turn over to step 9 on pages 83 and 84 and read the promises which were read here to you yesterday morning. And said, this is proof of that. And said, by the time you get on through the 9th step, you will have had some experiences, and you will have found a God of your very own. And says, that's the only way that I know for you to do this, but it's foolproof, and it'll even work for you if you do this. And I can stand up here and testify that it will. I've known a few people that come in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous who were surrendered when they came here. I was not one of those. The program surrendered me. And it'll surrender anyone, whether you be agnostic, atheist, Baptist, or whatnot. Incidentally, I think this is tremendous, this thing here that the Baptist facility they have and allow you people and us to use. In my area, we don't have many AA meetings in Baptist facilities. I can't tell you why. I've got an idea why, but that's mine. But I'm just grateful that the Baptists here do allow such a great function as this to go on in that facility. I think it's really tremendous. So profundity never got me sober. See, during my active alcoholism, I had to have something to take care of right now. Sobriety was so painful to me that I couldn't stand it. So I had to find something to take care of right then, and that bottle did. I knew that I was going to wind up in jail. I knew that I was going to have convulsions. I knew I was going to go into delirium tremors. I knew all this was going to happen. But right now, that drink was the thing that would solve my problem. And it wasn't until I came to you people and found this program that I found something that would take care of right now. And I think someone mentioned here the answer to any problem that might arise in their life at any time is within the first 164 pages of this book. And that is true. I don't need any sobriety and beyond, humility and beyond, and all of that. All I need to know is how to apply these steps, to keep it simple and to follow directions and to use these steps in my daily life. I wasn't allowed to read outside literature for a long time. And finally, after quite some length of time, David said, I think it'd be all right for you to read the Bible some now. But said, I want you to understand it's not conference-approved literature. So we were made to stick, or I was made to stick to the basics. David used to take me to a meeting every night, and I don't advise doing that for a new man for too long a period of time, because David told me we get dependent on others. And I tell David, I don't have a way to go to these meetings since you stopped picking me up. He says, we find walking helps. So I got to the meetings, and I was made to get to the meetings. So during that first year anyway, or the first several months especially, David has taken me somewhere every night to a meeting. And I didn't know the difference between closed meetings and open meetings. And I certainly wasn't going to ask David, because I didn't want him telling me, don't drink, go to meeting, read the big book. I got tired of that jazz. So the first meetings that we went to away from my group, well, he talked. And after 3 or 4 of these times, I said, David, is there anybody else in this thing that talks? And he said, nobody you need to hear. So he took me out to a group one night that wasn't a speaker meeting. And he said, now this is a closed meeting. And I wasn't going to ask him what a closed meeting was, but I said, David, are you going to talk? He said, no. Said, this is a closed meeting, and said, they're going to call on everybody. I said, they're going to call on me? He said, yeah. Well, I beamed because I wanted to get up and tell him what's wrong with this program. And he said, but let me give you some directions before we get there. Said, when they call on you, David believed in getting on your feet. He said, when they call on you, you stand up and say that you're an alcoholic, your name's Franklin Williams, you're a member of the Qantas group, and sit your butt down. He said, you done told these people all you know. I said, David, I thought. He said, oh no, you done the wrong thing there. That's the worst thing in the world a new alcoholic, a new member can do is think. Said your best thinking got you to this program. It says we'll do your thinking for you for the first year. At the end of a year, if we think you can think, we'll tell you so. And says if you go home tonight and think you got to go to the bathroom, you call me first. I said, David, don't you think I said, why should I call you? He said, you might not need to go. I said, don't you think I got sense enough to know whether I need to go to the bathroom or not? He said, we'll see. So that's the kind of profundity that I got. And those are the simple things that got through to me and got my attention. I always use this. I can sum up this whole ball of wax as far as I'm concerned. See, I told you I didn't have anything except the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is the basic text, and the 12 and 12. We didn't have the little 24-hour book in our group at that time. We do now. David told me that wasn't conference-approved literature, and said for me just get up every morning and read some out of that big book. And so that's what I did. We do have that now, and a lot of people use it, and I'm not against people using it. I just was brought up the other way. So I had to get me something simple that I could understand, that I could wake up every morning and use. And this is what I came up with, 6 words. Trust God, clean house, and help others. Now, I'm going to say a good many things up here this morning that are my opinion. And don't you pay any attention to what I say that's my opinion, because my opinion ain't worth a damn, except to me. My opinion didn't get me sober. But I'm going to say a lot of things, and I'm going to back it up with a big book. And if you don't believe it, I suggest that you go to the big book and see whether or not I'm right or not. And these words, trust God, clean house, and help others, I get from the big book, and I just concise. And one of the places that I got it is in the 11th chapter of Vision to You, the last number of sentences and series of words which are as beautiful as any I ever heard. Abandon yourself to God, admit your faults to Him and to your fellows, clear away the wreckage of your past, give freely of what you have found, and join us. And we shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and surely you will meet some of us as you tread your road to happy destiny. And didn't Bill say, let us instill in hearts and minds, or let us burn into the consciousness of every new person that they too can get well if they trust God and clean house. And then didn't Bill also say that the surest immunity against not drinking is working with others? So trust God, clean house, and help others. Now, I want to say this about a sponsor. I say get you a sponsor who has worked the steps. Now, the book don't tell me that, or the pamphlets on sponsorship don't tell me that. In fact, the book don't say anything about sponsorship, but the pamphlets do. But this is my opinion. Get you a sponsor who has worked the steps. How is someone who hadn't worked the fourth step going to tell me how to work the fourth step? We've got a boy at home that says you can't no more teach what you ain't learned and you can come back from where you ain't been. And I'm a strong believer in getting someone who has worked that step, because I've seen sponsors darn near kill people in AA. I think the wrong information is worse than no information at all. And I got some bad information in the front, because I wouldn't listen to David, because David was telling me things I didn't want to hear, and I was listening to what other people said. I know we had a fellow in our group named Robbie. Robbie's gone on somewhere, I don't know where, but he's not with us anymore. And Robbie used to tell me, he says, Franklin, your problem is that your capillaries are out of balance. And if you go to a doctor and can get your capillaries straightened out, you can drink socially. Well, I wanted to hear that. And so I went to David and I said, Robbie says I ain't got to do all these much. He said, all I got to do is find out about my capillaries. He said, what's the big book say about it? I said, I can't find nothing in there about it. He said, it must not be important. So I was listening for things like this because I wanted to continue to drink. And that's the reason I say get you a sponsor who has worked the steps, who has applied these things to his daily life. And I also say this about a sponsor. If you got a sponsor and after 60 days you still like him, you got the wrong darn sponsor. Because that sponsor's not telling you the truth. I think a sponsor in our area, a lot of people will take a fellow or a gal to a recovery house or a treatment center, and they call that sponsorship. Well, that ain't sponsorship. They can catch the bus and go there. Sponsorship is walking with somebody and explaining these steps to them, relating experiences in your life that are parallel experiences in their life, and loving these people with real tough love. And that's the type of sponsorship that I was taught. Eloise is talking about she can't sponsor many at one time. You ought to see her sponsor, and she's tough as the devil. And that's the reason she can't, because it really saps her, and it really takes a lot of her time. And the only way I know to sponsor somebody is the way David sponsored me, because it worked with me, and I think it'll work with anybody if I love them enough to tell them the truth, and explain this deal. And that's the reason I think that I need to have worked the steps in order to explain to another person how to work the steps. I've been talking for some length of time, and I won't get into why I've changed up. When my sponsors, I told you that my little sponsor, David Gates, died. I knew I had to have somebody tough. I've got somebody in Memphis that serves as a sponsor, but they like me too much or something, and they don't tell me the truth. And I got old Carl W. from down in Houston, Texas, and Willard P. out of Greensboro, North Carolina. And they're tough, and they tell me the truth. So they told me not too long ago, when are you going to stop acting a damn clown and get up there and talk about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous? We know what you've done in this program toward applying these steps to your life. Why don't you get up there and tell people and share with them what you have done and what has happened to you as a result of what you've done? So most of what I'm going to say after this I'm going to try to stick to what they said. It was real odd about this deal. One of them told me, and within 3 weeks' time, the other one told me, and I asked if they had seen each other, and they hadn't. And so Carl was the second one I saw, and he says, did it ever appear to you that God works through people, and maybe he's using us to tell you something? And it got my attention. I didn't know what the mental obsession was, nor the physicality. And David had me to read what the mental obsession was. That we are possessed of an obsession that someday, some way, we're going to find a way to drink successfully again. And that's what I was doing during these first 9 months. I was experimenting there about my capillaries and all, trying to find a way to drink successfully. And I have to get things down on a simple basis. And I always tell this story, and again, I like the way I tell it, and I haven't told it today, and I haven't heard it today, so I want to hear it. And I hope this old boy is not kin to you. His name was McGinnis, Red McGinnis. He's about as crazy as you, but he's much bigger than you. Old Red, as the name implies, had real bushy red hair. He's about 6'3" or 6'4", and the more I tell it, the bigger he gets. But the way I remember it, he's 220 or 30 or 40 pounds, somewhere along there, 6'2", 3", or somewhere along there. And his arms came way down below his knees, and his wrists were way along up here. Had the biggest hands any man I ever saw. And we were going out for freshman football, and we were in the grill there one day, and I smarted off to Red McGinnis. And the others in there began to laugh, and I turned around and laughed with them. And the next thing I knew, I'd get up off the floor, Red McGinnis done knocked me down. And every time I'd get up, Red McGinnis knocked me back down. I never laid a hand on Red, and he darn near killed me. Well, that was 50 years ago, I guess. Yeah, that was right at 50, it was 50 years ago. You know, today I have absolutely no mental obsession whatever that I could say something smart to Red McGinnis and get by with it. I absolutely unconditionally surrendered to Red McGinnis. But you know, it wasn't that way with alcohol. Alcohol knocked me down time and time again, and I'd get back up, say, you ain't going to do it next time. I'm going to switch to vodka. I'm going to switch to gin. I'm going to switch to this. I'm going to switch to that. And it wasn't until I had a Red McGinnis surrender to alcohol that I had any success. Now, this story is still important to me because there are times, many times, that I take over my life and try to run it again. And I get into trouble. And I talk to me. David told me there was a little Franklin in me that caused me all the trouble, and that I had to talk to him and push him back down and get him out of the way. And I say, little Franklin, what you got to do is have a Red McGinnis surrender to God. And I know what a Red McGinnis surrender is because I experienced it. And it's simple and I can understand it. And this is very important in my life today, as I say. Why did I come to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous? This is a suggested program. A judge suggested that I come. And he made it almost mandatory. Well, it was mandatory either to come here or to go to the penal farm. So I figured I had more to offer you people than I did the penal farm. So that's why I graced you with my presence. See, I came waking people, and it don't work that way. I had to learn to stop waking people, but to love people and to wake the program. And that's what you eventually taught me to do. I'll only talk about my last drunk because it's the only drunk that's of real importance to me. I don't talk a whole lot about drinking because I drank for 29 years, from the time I was 16 years old until I was 45. And I never learned a way to drink successfully. My first drink was with two brothers, and the three of us stole some corn whiskey from their father. 29 years later, I stole a jug of wine. The first drink at 16, I blacked out. I got sick and I blacked out. The last drink at 45, I got sick and blacked out. So I didn't make any progress in becoming a successful drinker. Now, if any of you want to know how to empty bottles, meet me afterwards and I'll tell you how to empty bottles. I can really do that. But I never found a successful way to drink alcohol as without getting into trouble. So I don't talk much about the drinking thing. I'll only mention my last drunk. I had been in AA, had been attending a few meetings of AA, just enough to let the judge know and to let my wife know, my ex-wife. She had left me. She's the one that turned me into you outfit. And a fellow called me, and I couldn't understand why anybody had called me. I wanted to know what his angle was. So I'd been around you for 9 months. So I went to see my first wife and asked her how sober I had to get before she'd take me back. And she said, "Oh, buddy, you'll never get sober enough for me to take you back." And said, "If you were to die tonight, who'd be your pallbearers?" And that was a lick below the belt. So the only thing I knew that would take care of right now was a drink. And I went out and emptied bottles, and I don't know how long or how many empty bottles. But I reached that point that you have reached where I couldn't get drunk and I couldn't get sober. So I decided to take my life. Now, this is not the only time that I had made a feeble attempt. I had others, but I know now I was only looking for self-pity and only looking for attention. But this time I wrote the suicide note. And looking back on writing that note now, it's real funny to me. I just loved to cry while I was drinking. And I was living in this garage apartment, and this lady had a old Victrola that she wound up. And she had Al Jolson's Sonny Boy. And I just loved to play that because I could cry gallons and gallons listening to that thing. And this old Nashville music, I just loved to cry by that stuff. And that old record player, it would wind down about halfway through it, and records start playing slowly, and I'd have to wind while it's running. Well, it's a job to get my crying cut down in time with the music. So I'd listen to that and cry and try to write, but the thing would wind down, and I'd have to go back over and wind it. So I got over there writing the suicide note. And I got to tell my wife I was going on. She could have everything. I had it all on. And it was just a bunch of blah, blah, blah. And I'd cried so much, David had given me a long yellow legal pad to write my inventory on. And I was writing the suicide note to her, to my wife, on that. And I'd cried so much that tears had dropped down on the bottom of the page, and I'd put an arrow up there and said, "See next page." And I got thinking about my funeral and all the people that's going to be there. And I could see my wife standing and looking over at the casket and saying, "Poor old Franklin, if I had only understood him, he'd still be alive." And I could see these two idiot brothers of hers standing on either side, that it made me an alcoholic. And they were saying, "Honey, you killed old Franklin. If you hadn't treated him that way, he'd still be with us." And she had two numbskull MDs that had tried to bug me. One of them had tried to bug me, and the other one wanted to send me to a resort in Mississippi called Whitfield. That's the insane asylum. And there they was saying, "Honey, if you had only understood old Franklin and left him here where we could take care of him, he'd still be here. You killed that poor boy." Now, I don't want you to think I had self-pity. So, I had borrowed a car and had stolen a piece of plastic hose, and stealing was a way of life with me then, just like drinking. And I had this out in the driveway there at the apartment. And so I went out to take my life. And I started the engine, and a peculiar thing happened. I got thirsty. I got thinking about that little spot of wine that was still in the room, and thinking what a cruel thing to do, to leave this cruel world and leave that drink behind. So I went back to polish it off, and another peculiar thing happened. I passed out. Somewhere between 1 and 1:30 the morning of October the 15th, 1956, I waked up. I didn't come to. Now, I was accustomed to coming to because I like to go to bed with a jug of wine by the side of the bed, and when I'd wake up or come to, I'd reach down and take a sip of that, which would slip me back into the arms of Morpheus. But this morning, I waked up, and my whole life passed before me. And I have talked to ministers and doctors about this since, and they say that happens to many of us before we die, and the decision that we make there many times determines whether we live or die. So my whole life passed before me, and I saw things in a different perspective than I had ever seen them before. And I no longer blame people and conditions, but I knew where the fault was, as with old Franklin. And even though I'd been around you for a period of 9 months with a closed mind, I remembered things that you had said. And I fell to my knees, and for the first time in my adult life, I said a honest and sincere prayer. And I don't know what I said other than God help me. But evidently I said enough and stayed there long enough to make a decision and to make a contract. And I believe I took, to the best of my ability, the first 3 steps of this program. I admitted that there wasn't any way that I could handle alcohol. No way whatever successfully. And I admitted there wasn't any way I could keep from drinking. Therefore, I was powerless over alcohol. I admitted I'd done the things I hadn't intended to do, and I'd left undone the things I had intended to do. And therefore, my life was unmanageable. And an unmanageable life to me is just that simple. Now, if my life was unmanageable, I need to manage it. And I remembered that you told me in step 3 about this management. So it made sense if my life was unmanageable that I turn my life and will over to this manager. Now I knew before this manager was going to move in my house and live with me, I had to first clean it up. So I knew I had to get to work on steps 4 through 10. But let me back up. I got back in bed and slept soundly till around 6 or 6:30. And you know that's not the way that you need. Ask him to remove your shortcomings. And he said, I'm not supposed to tell you you're an alcoholic. He said, I'm not going to tell you you're an alcoholic, but I'm going to tell you you're a real alcoholic. And real alcoholics get on their knees, and said, you get on your knees when you talk to God. So I fell to my knees, and I did what David told me. I said, I don't know anything about you, God, but I've got a lot of people, a lot of friends that know a lot about you. And they've told me what they did, and as a result of what they did, of what you had done for them. And they told me if I would do these things and talk to you, that you would also help me. And my little old sponsor, David, told me to tell you that I was going to report to duty every morning, and you tell me what to do and give me the strength and the courage to do it. And you know I meant it when I told him that. Well, they did pick me up, and they took me to the penal farm, and I stayed there the required length of time, and I knew that I had to have this program. And it's the first time in my life I did something without expecting brownie points. I asked the warden out there if we might start a group, and he said we could. And I asked him if I might call David. He knew David. So I called David, and he and some others came out, and we started a group at the penal farm. And that group is still there. And I have the privilege to go back out there now to hold meetings, and I've had the privilege to work with a lot of those people, and a good many of them are sober today. We've had some in our home, and a good many of them are sober. And I thank God that he has allowed me to be a channel for his love to flow from him through me to these people. And while there, I tried to sober up everybody that came out there. I tried to sober up the warden, and he didn't even have a drinking problem. But it was good for me because it kept me busy. It kept me active. It kept me doing something positive about this program of Alcoholics Anonymous. As you can see, I got out. And I went on with the other steps to the best of my ability. Now this is what Carl and Willard told me to talk about more. And I'm going to attempt to do it. Because I think many of us in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous settle for too little. There's a whole lot more to this program than just not drinking. And I am working harder, and this is the God's truth. I'm working harder today on the program of Alcoholics Anonymous than I ever have in the over 23 years that I've been here. Why? Because I've gotten enough of this program to get a glimpse of what is in this program. And what I have done so far has gotten me to where I am today. But I know I'm going to have to wait in order to keep what I have and to get more. Bill says in the big book, I'm not where I want to be now, and I'm not where I'm going to be. And I know that I can get as far as I want to in this program of Alcoholics Anonymous if I am only willing to seek God's help and to become willing to do the things that these steps tell me. And how do I know this? Because Bill says in the big book that the problem ahead is never greater than the power behind. And you heard a little insignificant nut up here last night talking, and he says something that he didn't say last night, and it's worth saying, and I've used it a number of times. I've given Dick credit for it, but I'm not going to do it anymore. He says that he can get as far as he wants to in this program because he'll never run out of God. Now, you roll that around for a while. He'll never run out of God, and that's exactly the way I feel about this thing. So I went along for a period of somewhere between 9 and 10 years of being the Pope of AA, owning my group, not letting just anybody talk to a new member when they'd come. I wanted them to get it from the source. And then I began to get uncomfortable. I began to get uncomfortable with me. Eloise told you it was uncomfortable as the devil at home. We had a civil war going on there every day, and what she's telling you is the truth. Things were real rough. If two alcoholics are married, you got problems. And I thoroughly agree with what Eloise said about one of you need to get in Al-Anon, or both of you get in Al-Anon. And I want to pay a tribute to Al-Anon right now. A number of them have done it up here during this thing. We wouldn't be living together today were it not for Al-Anon. And that little daughter of hers that was 10 years old when we married, that grew to hate and despise me, and used to shake her finger in my face and say, "You're not my daddy and you don't have a thing in the world to do with me." And Eloise and I drove her out of that house. I can't say Eloise did. I played a big part in it in myself. We know why she got married early. We know why she had another unsuccessful marriage, was to get away from two crazy cats at home like we were. And Eloise, I forget how many years ago, was told, as she told you, to go to Al-Anon. Now, she says this, she don't just automatically jump up and do something. She says she's in the 12th year of her 8-day diet now, so she don't do things just real spontaneously. But she went, and she would bring home Al-Anon literature and have me to read it and explain it to her. And I've learned a good deal about Al-Anon. Well, as a result of these two programs, we've got a home today, and we've got a beautiful relationship. When she comes home in the afternoon, we can sit down and talk and not scream and holler at one another. And that little kid today, little devil, she's 30 years old. But she's over at our house all the time, and she calls me her daddy, and she tells me she loves me. And here just not too long ago, she brought me a little old button that said Super Dad on it. She said, "I want you to have this." And there's a beautiful relationship. I think we drunks have got to lose something in order to really appreciate it. I lost that girl's love, and today I have it back. And money can't buy things like that. I've got to attribute this to the program of Al-Anon. Now, lest you Al-Anons feel too smugly, you remember we drunks got you where you are today. And don't you forget it. So I go along here for 9 or 10 years and getting uncomfortable as the devil. And I went to little old David. Now I said, "David, I've got to talk to you." So I told him. He said, "I know it." Said, "I've been trying to approach you for some length of time." And said, "You have put up a wall and you wouldn't let me get next to you." And said, "Let's go out on the lake Saturday and we'll talk about this thing." Said, "I've been praying that you would either come to me or come to somebody before you got drunk. Because it's only a matter of time until you would have gotten drunk with the feeling, with the resentments and the self-pity and the intolerance and the impatience and all that you have." So we went out there. David said, "Let's start at the front." And we started at the front. And then we got on to the first step. And he said, "I think you can take this step to in its entirety today. What about it? And I said, I sure can. That's not my problem. Except the unmanageable life. So he said, you were having a lot of trouble with the God business in the beginning, and you had to take the group as a higher power. He said, can you call your higher power God now and be comfortable with it? I said, I sure can. So he said, let's get to the third step. So he turned to the third step, and he had me to read the third step. And somebody mentioned here that about the prayer in the third step. After nearly 10 years in this program, I didn't know there was a prayer there with the third step. I didn't know that the big book suggested that we take it with another human being. See, this had been blocked out from me. So David said, let's get on our knees. And we got on our knees by law. And David said, read that third step prayer. So I read it. So then he said, Franklin said, I would like to hear it in your own words, and I think God would too. Said, why don't you say it out loud? So still on our knees, I bowed my head and closed my eyes. And I said, God, I offer myself to thee to do with me as I will. Relieve me of the bondage of self. Take away my difficulties so that victory over them may bear witness to those that I might serve of thy love, thy power, and thy way of life. May I always do thy will. And I opened my eyes, and David was looking at me, and tears would run down his cheek. Tears began to run down my cheek. And I embraced David for the first time that I had ever embraced a man. And I told him I loved him. I know many years prior to that, David told me he loved me, and I pushed back from him. I said, David, you're not one of those, are you? See, David was seeing what my conception of love was, and he saw real quickly. But a lot had taken place then. So then he said, now we are ready for step 4. He said, do you know why you're supposed to take step 4? I said, I know what the big book says about it. He said, well, that's not all the reason. Said, you need to take step 4 so you can take step 5. Said, you can't take step 5 until you take step 4. He said, turn to page 72. And he had me to read. And said, those who do not take this vital step do not relieve their alcoholism. They usually drink again. They haven't learned enough of humility by telling it all, and it had the word all in italics, telling it all to another human being. And David said when something's in italics it's really important. And said it must have meant all. Now he said, let's get back to the 4th step. Said, I gave you a legal pad to take the 4th step, and you showed me the first part of it, and I told you you're telling a damn lie. And said, you never did show me any more of it. And said, then you went and took it with a professional man, and said, I know why you did, because you was lying, and you knew I'd know you was lying. And says, you didn't go by the book in taking the step. Says, you took an immoral inventory. And said, an immoral inventory is worse than not taking any inventory at all, because it increases your guilt. Said, I'm surprised you stayed sober during this length of time. Said, all you've done is just haven't been drinking. Said, you haven't got any peace of mind or serenity at all. And said, you're not going to get it until you do this thing by the book. And I think there are a lot of people in Alcoholics Anonymous that don't take the 4th step because they're afraid to. They don't know how. Now, I'm no authority on it. All I'm going to do is tell you what's in the big book. And I didn't have brains enough to read something in the big book and retain it for a long time. I could read a sentence and couldn't retain it. But when David explained it to me, the way that he explained it, with the words that he explained and what he called me, I understood it. So he says, now I want you to read in the 4th step. He turned now to the page. I want you to read the 3 areas of your life that you need to examine. And I read it and still didn't see it. And David had to explain to me. The 3 areas of my life that I had to examine were my resentments, my fears, and my sex relations. So he said, all right, now we're going to take a page, and it's going to take more than that for many of them, but we're going to head each page, one of them with resentments, one of them with fears, and one of them with the sex deal. Said the book takes up resentments first. Said turn to page 56 or 65, whichever it is, where the format, 65, the format of taking the 4th step. And Paul, I really like our method of taking the 4 steps over and above the Al-Anon. Now, many of you think an Al-Anon I like best, but I can understand ours better. I'm not saying yours is not all right, but I like ours. I'm familiar with yours too. Eloise had me to read and explain those things to her. Well, if you look on page 65, I believe it is, on the right-hand side, the format of the resentments. You list your resentments, you list why you have this resentment and what effect it had on you. See, David told me when I took my inventory, all I did was to write down a series of bad things that I had done. I stole such and such a time. I had relations with a lady such and such a time. Well, hell, that ain't nothing but an immoral inventory, as he told me. So he said, what you need to do is to examine each one of these things. And if you remember on there, it says, I resent Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown, why? Because of his attentions to my wife. What effect does it have on me? My security, my sexual relations. Then he says, before we go any further, let's turn over to the 12 and 12 and read in there on the left-hand side of the first page of the explanation of the step 4, what the 3 God-given instincts are. So I turned over and read them. And the 3 God-given instincts are an instinct for sex, an instinct for emotional and material security, and an instinct for companionship. David said these are God-given, therefore they are good. Where you and I get into trouble is when one of these is threatened or when one of them is abused. Says, now let's go back to your format there on the resentments and put down how it affected you. Says you will find that in every instance what you did affected one or more of these 3 basic instincts. And I found that to be true. Then he says after you put on all your resentments and see what affected, what basic instinct was affected, then examine and see what emotion was affected. And if you look again at that page 65 at the format, you will see in parenthesis opposite each one that the basic emotion that was affected was fear. So I found out in my 4th step that my real problem is fear. And it reinforces what others had told me, that the only solution for fear is faith. And the only way a drunk like me is going to get faith or a psychic change, as Dr. Silkworth said and as Dr. Carl Jung said, was by applying these steps to my life. It's the only antidote for fear. Now, David had me also turn back to that fourth step in the 12 and 12 and read where it said that any time my sole purpose in life is to satisfy a basic instinct, then I am in trouble. I have another way of putting it. The motivating force that caused me to do everything wrong that I did wrong was a basic desire to satisfy a human ego. Now you roll that around for a while. To satisfy a human ego. That's the same thing as it says there when my whole desire is to satisfy these basic instincts. There's no way in the world that an alcoholic can satisfy his human ego. There's no way any person in the world can satisfy a human ego. This old boy was going fishing. He had to be an alcoholic. And he's going to last of the season, and he stopped by the minnow place to get some minnows, and he was overstocked on minnows, and they were dying. He needed to get some out. And so the fellow says, how much are your minnows? The man told him, all you want for $1. The old drunk says, give me $3 worth. Ain't no way to satisfy a human ego. Now, after I found out that the emotion that was affected was fear, then David had me to go back to the big book and in the explanation of step 4 to read what fear is. And it says that fear is where self-reliance fails us. Where self-reliance fails. And David said, you admitted in step 1 that you of yourself were nothing. So there is no self-reliance. We must come, or you must come to rely on a power greater than yourself. Then he says we are ready for step 5. So we went back to the lake. He loved to go to the lake. We went back out there, and I told him everything about old Franklin that had come to my conscious mind. I had it written down. And we went over the whole thing. And I've heard people say they go and take a fifth step in an hour. Maybe they did. Not me. Their fifth step wasn't like mine. Because David also took his fifth step with me. At least the parts of it that would parallel with mine, where some of this guilt would be removed. Now, I'd see I wasn't the only person that had thought and done these things. So after we took the fifth step, we sat down there again on that log, and he had me to read in the book. Says, we're going to follow directions, and we're going to keep it simple, just like the book says. So I read, and it said, after you have taken the fifth step, go home and get in a quiet place and thank God from the bottom of your heart that you know him better. And David said, when you do this, get on your knees. Says, then the book says, reread the first 5 steps in this program and see if you've left out anything. If you have, David said, if you have, write it down and come back and we'll finish. Well, I hadn't left out anything that I knew about. So then he says, you're ready for steps 6 and 7. And said, if you're not ready for your defects of character to be removed, the book said to pray for willingness. See, I didn't know there's all this praying in this deal. Pray for willingness. And David said that's the only thing you can pray for, is for willingness. And then for the power and the strength to carry out this. Then was entirely ready. I didn't know the 7-step prayer was in there, and I'm glad Carter's got it on these little cards, because I think those 2 things are so important. It says, when you become ready, get on your knees and say, and this is basically what I said, which is close to what's in the big book. God, I am now willing that you take all of me. Remove every single defect of character which stands in my way of my usefulness to you and to my fellows. May I always do thy bidding. Then David said, I was ready, and the book said, I was ready for steps 8 and 9. Page 76 in the big book has 4 steps on it. That's the only page in there that covers that many steps. And to do them is real short, and it's real simple. Once I pray for the willingness and then become ready to do them. So David said, I made a list of my people I'd harmed in step 4. Now pray for willingness to make amends to them. And so I did this, and I can truthfully say that I've made amends everywhere that I could possibly do. My father was dead. I can't make amends to him, but as David told me, my willingness to do it was the thing, and so I have no guilt there. This guilt has been removed. Now, I am one of these who thinks, and you may differ from me, but you have a right to. I don't think my mental obsession has been removed. My mental obsession has been replaced. I know God can remove anything, but I really believe this with me. See, a mental obsession, an idea that overpowers any other idea. I think today I have an idea that overpowers any other idea, that I want to stay sober today more than I want to drink, more than anything in the world. And if this changes over to the other, well, that obsession is right back. So I think it's been replaced. I don't think my character defects have been removed. If they have, they come back. And if they have been removed, the book don't say for how long they've been removed. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe a day, maybe 24 hours, or whatever. But with me, I think my character defects have been replaced. In other words, when I'm practicing gratitude, I can't have self-pity. When I'm practicing faith, I can't have fear. When I'm practicing patience, I can't have impatience. Now, as long as the pendulum is on that side, I have the positive deal. But you let it swing back the other way, and they are there again. This is just my conception. This is what I think has happened to me. mine have been replaced. And they can remain replaced for so long as I have the playful willingness to do the things that this book tells me to do, and I continue to do it. Continue to take a personal inventory. I was told when I came in by some people that take the first 9 steps and forget about them. The last 3 will maintain your sobriety. Well, maybe they can do this. I couldn't. And I think the big book backs me up in this. In the 12 and 12, I forget the page it's on, 43 or something. But in the explanation of the 4th step, in the 12 and 12, it's at the bottom of one page and the top, bottom of page 51, the top of page 52 in the 12 and 12. I think that's where it is. You can check me out. If that's wrong, you'll find it in the 4th step. It says the taking of a 4th step inventory is but the beginning of a lifetime process. That's practically verbatim of what the book says. Now, I want to add this. I've taken a number of 4th and 5th steps since that time when I had about 9 or 10 years of sobriety. And I have gotten a release each time that I've taken it. And I'm not telling you that you've got to take it, but I am telling you what I did, and that's all that any of us are supposed to do, is to share our strength, hope, and experience. And I'm working these steps on a continuous basis. When I begin to feel uncomfortable, I go back and start at the front of this thing and go through. I took a 5th step not too long ago with my sponsor. It was about a year ago. So it's getting close to time for me to take another one. See, I want more of this thing that I have. And today I'm willing to go to any lengths to get it. And to me, that's going to any lengths. I liken the 10th step to operating an automobile. Continue to take personal inventory. When wrong, promptly admit it. Some say this is, I can go back and pick up the slack in number 4 and 5 and that. Maybe you can. But I liken it to operating an automobile. Every day or every so often, I've got to get air in the tires. I've got to put gas in the tank. I've got to put oil in the motor. I've got to check the batteries. I've got to do these little maintenance things. But every now and then, I've got to have a major overhaul to that car. Every now and then in my personal life, I've got to go to the master mechanic and do some major overhauling in my life. Now, this is the way that I see it. This is the way that I do it. You do it the way that you get the best results from. But this, through my working the program and my experience, I have found that I get the best results. So sought through talking and listening to God. I've been retired for a little over 2 years, and there are some who are mean enough to say I never wait. But I did draw some money for a number of years, and I haven't had to put on my list of amends to repay that money. But I've been retired, and I've had more time to be with Franklin. And I've had some physical problems, and I have to spend a good deal of time in a recliner. And I'm there by myself. And I've gotten to where I love to be with old Franklin. We have some good conversations, me and little Franklin and God. And I get to leaning back there in that chair and reflecting back on what happened to old Franklin. I get to reflecting back to what happened to old Carter and to Ruth and to Don and many of you. And this thing, I'm awed at the power that's in this program. The power that's in this program. Suddenly we realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. And I've learned more about meditation in the last 20-something months than I've learned in the rest of my life. I don't do much talking to God anymore. I do a lot of listening. And I'm getting a whole lot. I think God talks to me through you people, and He talks to me through my conscience. And I'm getting a whole lot of it. And I'm just awed at it. And I have come to believe. Now, David also carried a dictionary with him every time we went somewhere, the big book in the dictionary. But he didn't tell me to read the dictionary. He just tell me every now and then to look up a word. So the word believe, he had me to look up, and one of the definitions is rely. So I have come to believe, I've come to rely on the forgiveness of God for yesterday and the grace of God for today. And that only leaves me today. And I know that the God of my understanding is not going to put any more on me today than me and him can handle. And if I ask him to let me become willing to do these things and to give me the strength and the courage and the power to do it, he hasn't failed me yet. And I don't think he ever will. This is a tremendous thing. I'm just beginning to really get a glimpse into the inside of this thing and to see the tremendous power that's here. And all I've got to do to get that power is become willing to do it, ask God to make me willing, and then to do it. Prayer and meditation. I didn't know how to pray for a long time, and I don't know how to pray formally, but I know how to talk and listen to God, and that's the way I have grown. And I didn't want to pray in the beginning, and David made me pray. I said, I don't believe it'll work. He said, the book don't say nothing about whether you believe or not. Let's do it. The two most important things about prayer, in my opinion, is starting, and secondly, keep doing it. And I don't care who you are, what faith, or what color, or what. If you'll start doing it and keep doing it, you'll come to believe, if you do it long enough. And I really believe with me, the third step of this program is being consummated in the 11th. Now, you heard me being, it hadn't been. Is being consummated in the 11th step. Why? Because everything about the third step changes with me except the decision. And I think the decision is the most important thing. My understanding of God changes. And hopefully I won't have the same understanding next week as I have now. I think it'll be a better one. And I know it'll be if I continue to talk and to listen to God and do these things. I didn't know what my life and will is. I know what it is today. My life is my action and my will is my thinking. And my life and my thinking and my life have changed. And I have really come to believe that there's nowhere in the world I can think myself into proper acting. I've got to act myself into proper thinking. So having had a personality change as a result of these first 11 steps, that spiritual awakening scared the devil out of me, and I would ask David about it all the time, and he had me to read that it's nothing in the world but a personality change sufficient to relieve my alcoholism. But said, don't you worry about it, you ain't got no damn personality. Said, you just do these things and maybe people will get to associate with you. So having had a spiritual awakening as a result of the first 11 steps, we tried to carry this message. What message? Keep it simple. The book tells you the message of a spiritual awakening as the first 11 steps. The only message I got. Old Dick knows, he mentioned Joe from over at Little Rock. And I'll give Joe credit one more time. He explains that message better than anybody I ever heard. He said Paul Revere carried a great message. He rode through the country yelling, the British are coming, the British are coming. And all the pictures you see of him, he's riding that horse, the British are coming. He never looked back. He didn't stop and get on and say, now, if I were you, I'd do this about your marital problem. If I were you, I'd do this about your financial problem. All he did was carry a simple message. The British are coming. The message took care of itself. They knew when he said the British are coming, they knew to haul ass. So what I'm supposed to do is carry a simple message of a spiritual awakening I've had as a result of the first 11 steps. And then to practice these principles, I'll only mention one principle, love. And I think that's the apex, the ultimate of all religions and all faiths is love. To practice love in all of my affairs. As Eloise brought out about us practicing there at home, as Dick brought out about him practicing in his home and at his wake. And incidentally, I've been out and spent some time with Dick. And he's a whale of a boy, and he's doing what he talked up here. Dick walks like he talks. And he's a tremendous AA, and I love Dick. So practice love in all of my affairs. At home, in my dealings with other people. I don't work no more, so I don't have to practice it in my work. That's one area that has been eliminated. So I just practice in my home with everybody that I come across. And doing something for free without any expectation or anything in return. I've been around this fellowship, and I have been around you people long enough to see and experience the miraculous healing power of love. The miraculous healing power of love. And I just hope and pray that today, that instead of being addicted to alcohol, I'm becoming addicted to love. And there's a whole lot of love in this deal. And I want some more. I want to get with these cats, honey. And I want to become a loving cat. And I'm on the right road, and I know I can get there if I just continue to do this. I want to close with my same story that I always tell, my football story. I like to think that this morning, the God of my understanding is saying unto me, Franklin, said, I'm getting up a football team. I'm going to make you the quarterback. I'm going to give you 3 men in the backfield that you lost during your active alcoholism. I'm going to give them back to you in the reverse order in which you lost them. I'm going to give you hope, faith, and charity. In the line, I'm going to give you 7 powerful men that you were introduced to in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you will use these 7 men, they'll block out resentment, self-pity, impatience, intolerance, all the stumbling blocks that you had during the first 45 years of your life. At the 2 ends, I'm going to give you patience and tolerance. At the 2 tackles, honesty and humility. And 2 guards, unselfishness and gratitude. And at center, I'm going to give you willingness. Now, it'll be necessary that you use willingness on every play. Now, this game is going to last a lifetime. There'll be no timeout, so I'm going to have to give you some ground rules. And these ground rules are the 10 Commandments. The first 4 of these commandments have to do with your relationship with your manager and your coach, God. And the last 6 have to do with your relationship with your teammates. Now, the goalposts are the gates of heaven. And the ball is your eternal soul. Now get in there and play ball. Ladies and gentlemen, I need each and every one of you in my search for truth in this game of life. And I thank God for the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, because it was you people that introduced me to the God of my understanding. And it was the God of my understanding that led me to you people. And if you people don't think this program will work, just keep it simple and follow directions. And if you don't think that God will help you, just ask Him. Thank you, and God bless you, and I love you.